Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead. Welcome to episode 164, Closing a Writing Session. Last week, we looked at opening a writing session, and we're going to bookend that special topic with closing a writing session. I do want to point out that our March 2024 workshop that we'll be offering is about tweaking your writing session. So if you are interested in checking that out, you can click on events in our show notes and on our website. It's also on Eventbrite. If you look at Defend, Publish, and Lead, you can look at our events at any time and the information will be up to date. But that topic is one that I've wanted to do for a very long time to demystify what professors do during a writing session. I will put a link to an article I wrote for Inside Higher Ed on this very topic because I know as a graduate student, I hadn't the faintest idea of what any of my professors were doing when they wrote. And I know that other people even now have no idea. So here would be another example of how that might look as a faculty member watching other faculty members write. I see faculty members write all the time. I meet with writing groups. I meet with a couple of faculty regularly where we meet in the library and they do some writing, I do some writing. I still don't have any idea what it is that they're actually doing during their writing session. So last week we looked at opening a writing session and how you actually might get started. And I used my processes as an example. This week I'll be doing the same thing by looking at how I close a writing session. I mentioned on setting realistic New Year's writing goals. I cannot remember the name of that episode. I will link to it in the show notes. It was just a couple episodes ago, but it was basically thinking through your writing habits and what you might want to do to tweak them in the new year. And for me, closing a writing session is the habit that is probably my worst habit. So I just told another faculty member that a lot of us have issues with different parts of writing. And for me, my laziness is always the thing that will burn me. So I make sure that I do talk about that today. My New Year's resolution in terms of writing is closing session by making sure that 8 minutes before I have to stop writing. So for example, if I have to stop writing at noon, I need to stop at 11:52 and close my writing session. I must take 8 minutes to do it. So this is something that will totally go against my belief of writing up to the last possible second and then scrambling, shoving everything in a bag, a lot of times forgetting where did I put my keys, where did I put my phone, all these other habits that just lead to additional stress. So in terms of the keys, I've air tagged everything. I've put dials on things. So I've done all those things. But I know for me, it's not worth the extra 5 minutes of writing to have everything be scrambled when I go to the next place and then have to kind of remember where was I yesterday when I wrote. It's just not worth that extra 5 minutes of time saving. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I close a writing session. And in my mind, closing means I write for 2 hours or I write for 1 hour or 30 minutes. It doesn't matter. Whatever that length is, I need to close it. And in most cases, I'm going to need 8 minutes to close it. So I have to stop 8 minutes before the time's up. So here's what I would do at that point. I'm going to share a screen in this episode. I mentioned last week how I like to use Penzu to kind of take notes for me. It's just a free online writing journal. It's really low tech, which is why I love it. It's super simple. It is free. It's cloud-based. You can grab it anywhere. And what is on my screen right now is just what I do with these notes. You don't have to use Penzu. You could write these down in a notebook. You could write them on an index card. You could use a colored Post-it that you stick in your laptop and you write down 3 things you want to do next week. You could, in a draft, like a Microsoft Word draft, use a yellow highlight where you left off. You could add a comment in. But the goal of all of the things that we're doing when we start the closing process is to leave a note for future you, future me, about what it was you were thinking at the exact moment when the writing session was closed. So what I did was I put up a screenshot of what my closing thoughts are for a writing session that I had today. And so what's showing on my Penzu screen is just a journal entry that is dated for February. This would be Friday, February 2nd. One of the things I'll do, and this would be for anybody that's using Penzu, I'm going to actually change the date of the title to what I want to call it. So for me, what I'm calling this note is, yes, it is my plan for February 7th and February 8th. And that is because today is a Friday, Monday and Tuesday, I'm not in the office. I'm doing some travel. So the next time I'm writing is Wednesday and Thursday next week. That's a long time for future me to remember what current me right now on February 2nd is thinking. And so I just make a quick note in Penzu that's a plan. That makes sense to me. The other thing about Penzu, which I'm showing on the screen that I like it, is it will put your most of the time you can get your entries that are the most recent to show up on top. There's other ways that you can kind of do it. You can add stars and all that, but I like to name the entries what they actually are. And the way that I'm going to think about it is, what's my plan? So if I would go in the little search tool in Penzu and type in plan, almost all of these are dated. So that way I could really quickly say, oh, I want to see what my plan is for February 7th. So why I also like Penzu is that I can add to this from anywhere. If I'm driving somebody up and I have to wait 5 minutes, I can get into Penzu from my phone. It's cloud-based. So I also like it that I can add to this list as I think of things. But here's some things that I'm doing when I'm closing the writing session. I have a whole mix of things, and I would imagine that you do too, of tasks, of ideas I'm still thinking about, and also just some list items of, okay, they're tasks, but what are some things maybe I need to find? So I'll give you an example from this note, because I know that sounds a little bit nebulous. If you're audio, bear with me. But these are the kinds of things that are in my plan for February 7th and 8th. And sometimes I just make a plan for the very next writing session. But in the case of this one, I know it's going to take me 2 writing sessions to do these things. So here's what I've got. I usually start with a list. And I have 3 things on my list. One is double check sabbatical slides and distribute email. That's because on February 7th, I'm going to write before I actually present a workshop on sabbaticals. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And that is one of our free webinars for February. I should throw that out there. By the time this episode is released, it will be past by then. But if you want that free webinar recording, you can email me at Christine@defendpublishedlead.com. Happy to share any of our free webinars with anyone who asks. So, the time that this is being recorded, though, I know the writing session will be in the morning before I do that workshop. The first thing I need to do in my writing session is just very quickly double check my slides and make sure the distribution email went out. So that's just a very quick thing. Technically, it's not totally writing related, but because it's slides and all that, I just threw it in with writing. Something like that takes me less than 10 minutes. So it's just a check on myself that I didn't mess up a presentation I have to do. The second thing that I have to do is a follow-up to make sure with an editor that an edited collection that I'm working on with 2 other co-editors is fully into the press. We submitted it. We haven't really heard very much about it, which is not atypical. We're in the process where we're moving into page production, but because I haven't gotten a real like confirmation, like, yep, we're good, we're ready to go, I wanted to give it a few days. And so this was a reminder to myself to follow up on that. So all that negative stuff, not negative, that's probably the wrong word, all that nagging stuff that you might be thinking about in your head, like, oh yeah, I got to check in with that person or I have to do that. These 2 things are kind of tiny items on what I'm planning to work on the 7th and the 8th. Maybe you might think of them as more administrative, but to me, anything with slides is writing related. That's not teaching. If it's a presentation for scholarship, slides is part of it. The other part is thinking through, do I have to follow up with any of my co-editors, my writers, co-authors? Those are all things that I will put in my writing time as follow-up. So here would be another thing. If you're wondering how to use an hour for writing time, sometimes spending that time writing that email, clarifying, are we using this kind of coding or this other kind of coding? All those things for me count in writing time because they are writing related. In a lot of ways, they'll make your writing better if you figure them out. So those are just 2 quick things. My guess is those 2 things together might take me 15, 20 minutes, but I put them as my first 2 items to tackle on February 7th because I know I will want to do that. And then my third one shows a little bit more about my writing process and how I basically set myself to open up my writing session on February 7th. So one of the things I know I'm ready to start doing is to get into an article that's halfway written about graduate student writing practices, but I haven't looked at those pieces probably in 8 weeks, 8 to 10 weeks. So what I have is my third item. So first one was checking my sabbatical slide presentation. My second one was following up on my edited collection. Is it in, not in? My third one is find article pieces for graduate student writing article. That's what I keep calling this article in my mind. So I'm not trying to rename it anything fancy. In my mind, it's the grad student writing article. So my third task is to find the pieces. So I'm going to find I have 2 rounds of interviews. So I have a bulleted list. This is another reason why I like Penzo. You can bullet lists and make it look like writing. I know I have to find 2 interview rounds of responses. I've already got them. I just need to find them. And then I have a draft so far that's already built using those, but I want to have the interviews handy. So one of the things I need to do for this project to actually get into my writing project when I get back on the 7th is to think through, all right, do I have all these pieces? Am I ready to start writing? I will then, my fourth thing on this list is to build the bones of the article. I know I have some organization that I need to do in there. So as I close out what I'm doing today, this episode's all about closing a writing session. I'm making that little list of things I know need to happen before I can go anywhere else. So what will happen then, as you could see on my opening a writing session or podcast episode last week, I did show a screenshot of Penzu there where I had stuff crossed off. That's because I was able to cross a few things off as part of the opening. Like maybe some of those things happened over the weekend before I wrote again. Or during a writing session, I will be crossing them off. So I'm going to show that a little bit more in our upcoming March workshop on tweaking your writing session. What are you doing during a writing session? I'll show that live. So I encourage you to grab a seat in there if you're interested in really tweaking your writing session practice. But in this closing a writing session, so I'm making these notes. That's what's happening. So when I say I've got 8 minutes to go, I open up Penzu, I make my plan, I date my journal entry. Okay, what's my plan for the next day that I'm able to write? I've got 3 things on my list. I just told you what the 3 things are. The third thing is actually even including a bulleted list underneath of all the things I need to find to make number 3 happen. And then here's the other thing that I really like about Penzu, but you could do this on a Post-it or whatever you want to do. Sometimes you've got a decision that you need to make that you need to think about a little bit. In my case, when I made this note, I was thinking, hey, I'm doing all this stuff on sabbaticals. I have extra bonus sabbatical podcast episodes. So if you haven't listened to those, check your podcast feed. I've been putting them out, kind of capturing my real life sabbatical. What am I doing? So it's kind of like a reality series, but maybe less exciting unless you're an academic nerd. But yeah, so that's my sabbatical series. And so what I started thinking about is, hey, I do a lot with Inside Higher Ed in terms of writing about things I'm thinking about. And I decided, I didn't decide, because this is why I wrote a note, but I decided to write a note to just ask myself, do I want to do a piece for Inside Higher Ed on sabbaticals, since I'm already doing the special podcast series and I've already done podcast episodes on it and I'm living a sabbatical right now. One of the things that I know that I would want to make as a point, which I also wrote here. So I'm asking myself the question, but I'm also leaving a note to myself about what I was thinking about as I close out the writing session for today. So this note, for the record, is not about the writing project I was working on, but it's something in my head as I'm sitting here thinking about academic projects. So what I'm trying to capture in this episode for you is how I'm making sure I don't lose that stuff. So I wrote myself a little note. Should I do this or not? Here's some things I know that have to go in this Inside Higher Ed piece if I would do it. And I know one piece for me that was kind of crucial was, as I was thinking about my sabbatical slides for a presentation I'm doing next week, one of the points I'm making in that webinar is that a lot of people, when they have a sabbatical, aren't fully free from their duties at their home institution. That might be the case if you're at a Research One institution, a high-level research institution, where you might be able to disappear for a year and go to Peru or wherever you're going and not have to do anything back at your home institution. But many of us, in fact, the majority of us, are at regional state schools, comprehensive universities, small liberal arts colleges, where we might still have some advising or responsibilities and all that. And I know I am somebody that is in that that situation right now where I do have some things that I have to think about. So I know I captured that in my special sabbatical episodes. If you're interested in hearing about that and what I'm doing about it so I can still get some work done, check those special episodes out. But I know for me, that's something I'm thinking about. I want to make sure I don't lose that, but I also don't want to make a decision on that today. I don't know that I want to work in writing that piece on top of some other things I'm trying to do. One other thing I did do that I try to do is I also put a direct link to my Asana project management board in my Penzu note. And I'm doing this on purpose. One, if I put the link in there, it will directly open up my Asana without logging in, which I love, so I don't have to log in again. I don't know why it works, it just does. But the other thing is it's forcing me to make the call. So when I come back to future me and I open my writing session on February 7th, I can look at this note and say, well, am I doing this? Am I not doing it? And then if I am going to do it, it's a reminder. It's an item for me here to put it in my Asana project management system, because that article will then become a project. So hopefully this clarifies how you might go through closing a writing session. For me, closing primarily means talking to myself in a way where I can capture some notes so that future me as a writer knows what it is that I'm working on. But there's also two other things that I should say go with closing. I am notorious for leaving my plug for my laptop, plugged underneath the table, and I'll just grab my laptop and run. I won't even bother with the plug because I forget. I forget my phone. I forget my keys. So the other thing that I have as a note, and I probably should hold it up, but it's too far out of my reach to show on screen. Another thing is just a Post-it note reminding myself, do you have a key? Do you have your keys? Do you have your phone? Do you have your coat? Do you have a plug? So I feel like I'm an 85-year-old grandma, trying to remember these things, but that's the reality. When you're jamming writing in other places, a lot of us don't have that mental time to just make sure we have all the pieces before we get running again. So I know for me, if I take that 8 minutes to kind of dump out what's in my head, make a note for the next writing session, make sure I have all the things before I go to the next activity, it is so much more satisfying and enriching. And I have to say that just doing this for a couple of weeks as I started out the new semester, it has really been a game changer to be a little bit more intentional, a little bit more organized, a little bit more calm. Part of that, yes, I have a little bit more bendable room because I am on sabbatical. I'm not rushing to a class or something all the time, but I would really make a case for closing a writing session. In some ways, I almost think it's more important than opening one up, because a lot of times many of us have been able to get by getting some writing going with whatever habits we had before. But really closing a writing session to me has been the productivity piece and kind of the game changer, because February 7th might come along. So that's, it's a Friday now. This will be the Wednesday after when I look at this note again. It may be on that day that I could care less about what is in this note because I had a brilliant idea and I want to work on something else. That's okay. This note is sitting here for me to look at when future me might be sitting there thinking, oh, what am I supposed to be doing? So another thing I like about Penzu is these notes are kind of sitting there patiently waiting for you. They're not as likely to get lost as like a quick Post-it or a place you wrote it down. The other thing that I can do when I'm stuck in a writing session, so clicking back to the opening part, but the other thing I can do is search for the word plan, and I can pull it up. And I can say, all right, what was the last time I made a plan? What am I supposed to be doing? So I'm hoping that these strategies help as we start thinking through writing sessions. And once again, I'd encourage you to sign up for our March workshop on writing sessions. Seats will be limited for this one because it works better with a slightly smaller group. So I encourage you to grab your space. And also, I hope you're getting a chance to listen to our real life sabbatical episodes. I do argue that some of the value in these is not even so much being on sabbatical, because many of us are at institutions where you don't even have something like that. You don't have a release time from work. But I am thinking through in this series, what about bigger projects? What about longer stretches of writing, and how do you use those? So you can see some of those questions worked out over the next couple of weeks. And I hope you have a good writing session today. Happy writing.